today we are having such an amazing session, and we're starting an 8-part series that is totally different than anything we've done before, and I'm really excited about this. And so I'm going to get myself out of the way. Why don't you walk us into what's happening over the next 8 weeks and what's happening today specifically?
Okay, well, good morning. It's Wednesday. That means it's Core 90 in the community, and we are super excited to be here. So, as you guys know, we've had a few sessions about different transactional stuff, and we really get into some meaty conversations there. So, the leadership group here at the community had a conversation, and we said, you know what? Let's do a series about the anatomy of a transaction where we can kind of split up a real estate transaction into several different parts and really talk at a deep level and get really into the nitty gritty details. And so we've created an 8-part series. Today is our first day of that, and we're going to start talking about listings. Then we're going to talk about buyers. We're going to talk about lending. We're going to talk about inspections, appraisals, closing and post closing. And then we're going to talk about kind of some special categories like land sales and multifamily and those kinds of things. And here's the deal. Even if you are the most seasoned agent, which I know many of you are, you're going to get something out of this. One of the things that I love so much about listening to other agents talk is learning little changes, little ways to tweak my own business and things that I could do differently. I had a conversation yesterday with some agents, and I was like, you're doing what? You're using who? You're partnering how? And it's so fun. I love being able to expand because in real estate, every transaction is different. Every client is different. Every inspection and negotiation is different. So the more ideas and the more experience we can get, the better. So if you're new, you're really going to love this series because you're going to get all of that and you're going to have some really, really great ideas. So without further ado, Jeff, if you are ready, we're going to start today with a panel. I have 3 people that are joining me, and I'll be honest, I chose this panel because they not only are skilled and have tons of experience, but they're really detailed people. They are very interested and focused on like having a systematic approach to things, and they really know every jot and tittle, as Jeff would say, from the paperwork stuff to dealing with people and all and everything in between that goes on. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our panel for today. They all happen to be from Oregon, with one of them, though, also being a licensed agent in Mexico. So he's got a lot of international experience, which is fantastic. And so let me start with, we have, here we are, Jeannie Scott from the Willamette Valley, mostly kind of Salem, Monmouth, Independence area. We have Joe Yates coming from Southern Oregon and Mexico. And then we have Nancy Kruse coming from the Albany, Corvallis, Salem, Willamette Valley area as well. So one of the things, though, don't be alarmed if you are not an Oregon agent. I've been licensed in Oregon. I am licensed in Arizona, also soon to be licensed in the state of New Mexico. But we're going to keep this pretty neutral in terms of like state requirements and those kinds of things, because we know that many of you guys out there are not specific to Oregon. And so we're just going to keep it general. We're not going to get in too deep on documents. And our panelists are just going to share with you their experience. Guys, I have a few slides, but they are really just guide slides for us to kind of talk about each little section of a listing transaction. We're not going to talk about lead generation today. That's a whole nother session. You guys know in the community, we talk about lead generation a lot because we know that is at the end of the day where our business comes from. And so we'll have many, many other sessions on that, but today and for this series, we're just going to focus on listings and some of those details. Guys, when we get to the end, when we're talking more about inspections, appraisals, and closings and lending and that kind of stuff, we're not going to talk too much about that simply because we're going to have specific sessions on that. So you'll see when we start, we're really going to be talking about the kind of basics of starting out with the appointment. Jeff, let's get going. Let's show everybody our first slide. And then I want to hear from our guests. So the very first thing, let's just pretend in this scenario, you guys, that you have been doing lead generation. Maybe it's from a third-party organization that you pay or that you do on a commission basis, or maybe you've been hitting the phones hard and you've been calling, or maybe it's even from your sphere of influence, right? Somebody that you already know, maybe it's a referral client, something like that. But you have magically been able to set an appointment time. And I think this is the first thing that people really need to understand is so critical, because we think it's like, oh, well, we just set up an appointment time. I think it's more than that. And I'd like to hear from you guys. Jeff's going to pull down our slide, and I just put these up here as little fodder for us, to talk about. But when you're on the phone with somebody and you're setting an appointment, what does that look and sound like? What are some of the things that you make sure that you guys say or need to say? Jump in there, guy. You need to unmute. Sorry.
Well, when I'm on the phone with people, the first setting that appointment, a lot of times I don't know much about their property at that point. So I try to get as not without overwhelming or without going into too much detail with them on a lot of things. One of the number one things is I make sure that the information that's public about their property is correct, because it sets me up for being able to really know as much as I can from their perspective, and then also from what the public perspective is of their property going into it. So I always confirm that those kinds of details. That's like one of my first conversations I have with people is
and you do that on the phone?
I do. Have you made any changes? Things like that. Like, just so that when I haven't done that in the past, I'll show up and they'll be like, oh, well, there's the information I have later about the square footage, and you can sometimes even see it when you get there. You're like, oh, after I did my report, it's got 4 bedrooms, not 3, things like that. And so,
Gotcha.
and then your numbers that you have in your head about the value when they start asking about those questions are going to be wrong. So,
okay.
I would rather know in advance if there was any changes or corrections that need to be made.
Gotcha.
Good. That's one of the
and we are going to talk about kind of like the preparation before you go into the appointment. And but I love that when you're on the phone with them, you're like, hey, I just want to verify really quickly. Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
So while I'm setting up the appointment, because I like to go to my appointment very, very prepared. Mm-hmm. And so getting that information, as much information as I can prior to being at the appointment. Yeah.
Love it. Nancy?
Well, I have a lot of repeat business and referral business. A lot of my business is that way. I'd say like 96% probably. And so a lot of the repeat business, I know the houses. So I just confirm the appointment with them and go over that briefly. What I'm going to do is come and walk through. Have you shown me any improvements that you've made? We're going to, I take my notes and I do a 2-step process. So I tell them, the first appointment is maybe a half an hour to 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I tell them, what they can expect. And then we set the appointment for the follow-up for the presentation.
Okay. So, that's awesome.
And then I either call or text them before the appointment to just confirm.
That's great.
Yeah. So
Joe, how about you?
Yeah. I mean, I really want one for me on everything, whether I'm working with a buyer or working with a seller. It's great if they're a repeat client. But I mean, I just try to take charge right out of the gate. I always say, the more confidence you have in yourself, the more confidence you can demonstrate, the more likely they are to have confidence in you. And then the minute they have confidence in you, you've kind of won. Um, I don't do, I do a lot of preliminary work as far as trying to figure out the area and stuff like that. I'm going to be going to an appointment later today that I'm totally unfamiliar with. I mean, we're starting to do some deals in areas that aren't necessarily always right where we're at, just because of the fact that, you know, the number of deals. And so I'm going to be in their neighborhood at least an hour prior to,
Nice.
and then I'm going to pull comps. I'm going to drive by a couple. That way, you know, the minute they talk about the one that's 2 blocks over, I'm familiar with it.
I love
Um,
that.
One thing I don't do is ever come in with, and I don't commit to value, period. You can get me
Same.
on the ground, twist my arm behind my back. You will not
Me
get
too.
any numbers out of me before I leave your house. I'm just going to say I believe in prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. I let them know I came in with no preconceived notion of the value of their property, but I do know the area, I do know the comps, and so I will circle back, but I will leave you with zero as far as a guess when it comes to the value of your property until I get a chance to dial it in.
I love that. And I do think that that's part of when you're setting an appointment, it's really important to kind of tell them what you're going to be doing. I'd love to get a tour from you, because sometimes, we take it for granted because we know what we're going to do, right? But a client doesn't necessarily know. And so I don't know what people think. I really don't, but it helps to tell them, I'm going to be doing a tour of the whole house and property.
Mhm.
I'd love to see, if there's anything special. I worked with a lot of specialty, and I know in a lot of our areas, there's some rural properties where maybe there's a Christmas tree farm there, or maybe it's an equine, there are horse stalls, and those kinds of things. You need to tell them that you are going to see those things, that you need or want to see those, those portions of the property, so they understand. I'd like to say that everybody will make sure they have their house clean, but we all know that's a pipe dream.
No,
But
I don't
anyway,
I would never suggest that they have I try to keep it very, very, very relaxed, especially the
right.
first meeting, with absolutely no pressure and just an opportunity to build rapport and show confidence. So, I don't do a lot in the preliminary calls, because when I'm there, then we walk the property, show, look for red flags, do those kinds of things. And I like to get kind of, a base, like not necessarily, I'm not going to tell them how much their home is worth, but definitely a range, and then determine at the appointment. A lot of times is like, what's your motivation and what's your timeline, because that timeline is always hugely different. If we're going to be listing in the next 4 weeks, I'm going to have a number for you by then.
Right.
But if you're looking at even 6 weeks out, I'm going to have to look at the comps again to see what else has sold, and that can change drastically.
Yeah.
So I like that. For me, I always keep it pretty simple. Set the appointment time, set some expectations for what you're going to be doing. And then I'm like Joe, I like to go early. Number one, stuff happens and it can be harder to find a house than you think, especially if it's further away. So give yourselves a lot of cushion to get there, drive around, check out some of the comps, and just be on time, for heaven's sakes. That's really annoying when you're not. Jeff, pull up the next slide, because we're naturally kind of moving into this like preparation.
That set appointment is a very
Yeah, it is very specific, but I mean, you guys brought up some really valid points. Like Jeannie, you said, I like to ask a couple of questions because I want to know certain things before I start doing my research. Joe's like, I need to check out the house two doors down that just sold, or around the block or whatever, because those people are going to bring that up.
Yeah.
Nancy is like, I like to tell them what I'm going to be doing while I'm there so that they understand. And Nancy mentioned, by the way, she has a 2-step process. So she probably meets with clients twice. That works if you know the person and they're really going to work with you. If the bulk of my listing business was built on making cold calls to expireds and for sale by owners. And a lot of times it was me on the phone at 9:00 in the morning and saying, you bet I can be there at 12:45. Right. And then I'm like literally at their house at 12:45 that day. And my intent is to take the listing right then and right there. So it just depends. There's a million different ways to do this. But let's talk about pre-listing prep, because I believe that this is where listings are won or lost. Honestly, I really do. Because if you want to walk in with the confidence that Joe's talking about and having the knowledge base that Jeannie and Nancy are referencing and building trust and all that, you better have your poop in a group ahead of time. You need to know what the comps look like. You need to know if Joe's house 2 doors down did sell, because they're going to bring it up and you better know. So you got to take into consideration what's going on in the local market. Some people pull like a whole title packet. I, at a bare minimum, when I'm doing the CMA, will check the tax records on the MLS to make sure that the person I'm talking to is the legal person, the legal seller. They have
Yes.
capacity to sell the home, that there's not another person involved. If there is, I need to know. Or if it's in the name of maybe an estate, right? So it may be a trust name. And you need to know that only because if you do take the listing in the moment, which hopefully you do, you're going to get the name right, because a lot of times clients aren't used to that. They'll give you their name, they'll sign everything, and then you'll find out a week later that it's really in a trust name. And now you got to do a bunch of addenda to change the name and all that stuff. But you want to, check those few things. And then you do want to think about, given the information, I think, what that spectrum is, right? So what do you guys do? For me, I don't pull a full CMA. I pull, I do the process of a CMA, but I usually just use the summary report that shows days on market, listing price, sales price, the mean, median, the average, high and low, because for me, that gives a spectrum for me to move on, so that when I do drive around the neighborhood and I see that it's better or worse, and I get in the house and I get the tour and I see it's better or worse, then I can adjust on that scale, right? What do you guys do? Joe?
Different amounts of work, quite honestly, and do things differently depending on the property,
Yep.
the price point, client. And part of my whole thing about going in with no preconceived numbers right out of the gate, part of it has to do with the fact that sometimes I'm going 100 miles an hour and I didn't have a chance to really pay that much attention to your home before I got there. So, I basically am I'm not nervous going in, even if I haven't had a chance to do much homework, because of the fact that I already know I'm not going to tell them anything. So I have a spiel that I'm just going to go through, and you get nothing, and I'm going to tell you the sophisticated professional reason why I'm going to give you nothing. But it might be because I just got back from Cabo the night before and I forgot I even had to meet with you. But it's the same thing regardless. You can still get nothing, and then I'll go back and get it.
So like having a follow-up plan, is that what you mean? Because like I definitely have like a follow-up process if I don't have all the information, or if people don't make a decision, or I get in the moment and I'm like, crap, I don't know, I got to do a lot more research because I didn't realize they had a whatever. And so I always have like a follow-up plan, like an email thing that I send. And
Right. So my thing is the same every single time, because I don't have a number to begin with. I don't care, quite honestly. I'm not going to tell them anything, even if they start beating me to a pulp. It doesn't matter. I'm not giving you a number. So I can walk around and just talk about how great their property is, or how surprised I am by something, or whatever the case is, because I'm not going to give you anything anyway. So, and I'm not going to follow back up in person, because I'm one guy. So I've only got so much time, and I've always ran my business trying to do a decent amount of volume as one guy, and try to figure out how can I best use my time to, maximize just Joe Yates. And I can't drive to your house twice. Sorry. The second time is either going to be with a sign on a lockbox, or I'll never see you again. But the one thing that I do that I think works really well for me.
I thought I was the only one.
Yeah, good. I like it. So no, I'm very selfish with my time.
You get 1 hour.
freaking ESPN than, dinking around on something I don't need to be doing, talking to you a second time. Sorry, clients, if you're ever on here. But here's one thing I do that I think can be helpful. To me, I think one of the most difficult things in the listing or while taking a listing is telling the client what value you came up with. I mean, I think that's where most people, even if you feel convicted of it, because of the fact that the client thinks it's one thing, and all of a sudden you're having to sit there and go, yeah, this and that. You start him-hawing around, and you start going, and finally you tell them the number, knowing that maybe it is, maybe it isn't what they were thinking. And one, I try to get them to hint. Oftentimes clients won't, but if you can get them to hint at their number, then that's going to give you a huge advantage.
Sure.
But this is one thing I like to share this because of the fact it works for me, and I think it makes that piece of the puzzle super easy. I'm never uncomfortable telling the client what the value of their home is. And I tell them, because it looks like I'm going to do a ton of work. I kind of do. But I go, okay, I just want you to know that what I'm doing is I'm going to work up the value of your home. I'm going to look at it 3 different ways. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the automated value of your home. So that's going to be things like Zillow, Realtor, Redfin, things like that. And I don't really care about them particularly. However, the customers are going to be looking at that.
That's what buyers are looking at.
Yeah. So
Perceived value.
Yeah, so since you and the neighbors and everybody else are going to be paying attention to that, I'm going to look at the automated value of your property. And so right out of the gate, in 16 seconds, I did my first thing, right? So I've gone through, I take the printout of their property, slap it down, go online, type in their address, and I write down Zillow, Realtor, Redfin, and get some numbers, okay? And then from there, I tell them, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to work up the market analysis on your property. And with that, and here's where it gets good to me. It's my thing. I think it's good. So I work up the market analysis. I go, these are comps. These are the comps that the appraiser is going to have to pay attention to. This is math. And math is math. I don't even like math necessarily, but math is irrefutable. So these are the numbers that math says. And so I'm going to have first one, which is going to be the automated value. The second one, it's not my number, it's math. And then the third number I work up is, and then after that, I'm going to come up with a third number based on your specific property, aspects of your property are marketable that other people might not have, the interest rates, what the competition is right now. Because if it's okay with you, I would like to cheat the value up just a little bit when we hit the market and make sure that we maximize this and get every single thing out of this that we can. So I worked up the automated. I gave them math, which I don't take responsibility for. I'm like, the value of your property is $450, but that's math, has nothing to do with me. And then I become the good guy and say, however, I like this number based on your particular property, and I would like to cheat it just a little bit if you're okay with that, which they always like me because I'm not in alignment with math. I'm in alignment with getting the most I can.
Yep. So it's really hard to say. You can see it's all tied together, right? So in Joe's preparation, he's going to snap look at a couple of things because he needs to be able to have that kind of a conversation in the moment when he's in the appointment. For me, like I said, I pull up the comps, the summary report at a bare minimum because it gives me that kind of span so that when I do ask them in an appointment, like, what do you have a thought about the price or, the value, then I can have that conversation. And I love that verbiage about kind of cheating it up. So it's,
the pre-listings.
Talk a little bit about yours.
Like I said, I get them for the first initial call with setting the appointment. I find out if there's anything changed because I haven't seen this property before. And, I will sometimes, I do more of an extensive. I think probably the most amount I personally do is prior to the listing appointment. That way, when I'm there, I don't have to go back again. So when I actually do everything I can in advance, but I always tell them, like at the pre-call, before I get there, I say, I need to see your property because I can't give you any kind of number until I see it. Because there's people that are like, oh, what do you think it's worth? Even when you're on the phone with them before you get there. I'm like, there's no way I can tell you that. I don't know how your house compares, and apples and oranges. And do you have an apple? Do you have an orange? That kind of thing. So
I feel like that's a really important, it's almost I won't say it's a legal disclaimer because I'm not an attorney, but I will say you need to be really careful there, you guys. So pay attention. If you haven't been in the house before, sometimes like Nancy said, and I've had a lot of these clients too, I'm sure all of us have, where you sold them the house. They were the buyer, they were your buyer. So you've seen that house, you've been through inspections with them, you've been through appraisal. So so you can say like, hey,
you never want to backtrack. You never want to. You don't want to show up and find out that the next door neighbor is a major hoarder and so their house smells and there's probably rats. That impacts their value and you would have no idea.
There's always going to be stuff that you can't. So to always say, until I get there, I'm not going to be able to give you an idea yet.
So I also look at the history of their property and how it's sold previously, because they also, like, if they know that the house when they bought it was either competitive or if it was on the market for a long time before they purchased it, they know why. Like, why do you think this house didn't sell? In a market 3 years ago when things were selling with multiple offers in 3 days. Like, they also know that they're still going to be facing those same issues moving forward. So I try to get as much information as I can about the property prior to seeing it. And that's the things like the market, the neighborhood, Zillow, all of the things that are out of our control. And then when I do that all pre-listing wise, and I do run a full CMA. I don't print it out, and I don't. The numbers are part of the marketing plan. The numbers aren't necessarily ever part of like the listing agreement. They're part of the marketing plan for me. Like we have a ballpark, but how can we get the most? It's going to depend. Some houses you walk into, they're ready for pictures this week. Some of them, like we can't put this in pre-list status because we don't want nobody driving by until we get the yard cleaned up. Like there's so many different variables that you don't know until you get there. So I try to go in with as much information about the property as possible because it gives me that competency and the confidence to be able to have and answer the questions that they may have.
Yeah, me too.
I don't bring paper. I never bring paper with me.
Okay, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Nancy, what do you do before you get there?
I order a full list packet so that I've got the data on the house. And I don't ask them a lot of questions on setting the appointment. I just go over what I'm going to do. And then when I get there, because I like to build rapport with them, I'm really relational. It's probably one of the reasons I do a two-step, because I use the time on my first appointment to have them show me all the updates they made. Find out, one of the first things I'm going to ask them is, what are you going to do after you sell? Because there's a lot of agents that don't ask that, and some of the people haven't understood that the market was rapidly moving, and if they sell and don't know where they're going or what they're doing. So I always want to know that so that I can help them. So anyway,
do you do a CMA before the appointment?
Oh yeah. So the first appointment, like I said, is like about a half an hour, 45 minutes. We go through the whole house. Then I've seen it. I know what the neighborhood looks like. I know the condition of the house, if I'm going to need to recommend staging or what. So then I go back, and I usually go back in 2 days, within 2 days. And so at that point, then I do a full CMA. I use Cloud CMA, where there's pictures of the comps of the inside of the house, so that if their house doesn't look well or is really dated, they can see that this one is listed for more money. So when I get to the price, and I will never tell them price either. And I learned a big lesson because I did it one time and I was way off, and never do it again. Early in my career, I did it. I made a big mistake.
It's interesting that you mentioned Cloud CMA, because that's another probably big part for a lot of people, is they understand that there are so many different products out there that we can use for getting that CMA. And when I started working with Lexy, it was just the basic summary. And then I've learned to utilize the RPR, which is my favorite. And I use RPR and to get, because it has like the history. It has literally, I've never actually gotten a list pack from a title company because it's all there in one place.
That's the one thing. So, there's no one tool. It's whatever tool that you're going to use, whatever makes sense to you. You can tell just in talking to all of us, there's a lot of different, there are variances. I feel like, you need to have however you do it. My goal is always to take the listing the first time. I don't like repeat visits because honestly, I mean, if it's a client that I know is going to work with me, then if I need 2 visits, fine, but usually I don't. And part of it is for me, like on the MLS, that's the quickest tool for me. And I would tell a new agent, the one thing you should get really good at fast, like go to your MLS and do the classes that they do online or in person, get a mentor, talk to somebody else, ask a bunch of different other agents how they do it or whatever, but learn how to do a CMA and to understand and synthesize that information quickly. I can pull a pretty comprehensive, like I think a thorough, CMA and get the data that I want in about 5 minutes, including the tax data. So I have everything that I need. Jeannie uses, RPR, which is awesome. That's a tool that she's gotten used to. I just go into my MLS, I pull it, I print 1 page, I print the summary CMA, and I take that with me so that I can show them. Because I find a lot of people, I like to. I'm an educator, so I think about the ways that people learn. So some people are visual, some people like to see the numbers, some people need to hear it. And that's an easy sheet, 1 piece of paper. But I always send myself the link of the CMAs so that I can, on my phone, if I want to, if they're like, Joe's house is not nicer than ours, and I can, or it does not have a pool. And I'm thinking to myself, well, actually it does. And let me show you Joe's house, right?
Yeah.
Because then I can go, well, let's look at it because I pulled up the CMA. I can pull it up and I can show them the pictures.
That's how I am with that RPR as well.
And I just
app on my phone and I can pull it up and be like, here you go.
That's the thing. It's just a tool that I like to have in my arsenal so that if I need more information or more data, it's right there to show them. And then I will send them that link as a follow-up. And just so you guys know, I always pull comps in 3 ways for a listing appointment. I pull what's currently on the market, I pull what's pending, and I pull what's sold. And I explain that to my clients when I send them the email. And it's because number 1, you need to see what's currently on the market because that's what other buyers are looking at. They want to compare to that, right?
Competition. Yeah.
Right. I always tell them what Joe says, the whole Zestimate is Zillow's estimate of your house and other houses. So you can take those comps and look at them and see how you compare, even according to Zillow, which may or may not be correct. That's not the point. It's just another point of reference, right? So I always, make sure that they understand pending is going to tell us how quickly things are moving on the market. And solds are the traditional way and what we need to do because that's what an appraiser is going to look at. And that's what ultimately at the end of the day assesses your value. So there's market demand, which we're going to cover in your competition. There's pendings, which is going to tell us the speed of the market in your realm. And then there's the appraisal kind of formal sold. So I always just pull those. And some of that I can do after the fact. If I don't take the listing in the moment, that's part of my follow-up email process for them. But I like to be pretty dialed in to have a range. And I always give a range in pricing because some people, and I explain to them the correlation between time and price.
Same.
Yeah.
If
because their motivation is everything to do with it. Like
that's it.
If they're having to, maybe want to purchase another property, that comes into play on where, again, that's marketing strategy.
Maybe they have a contingent on selling this house. They have an offer in on another house that's been accepted, but it's contingent to selling this, and they have to be in another state for their work. So guess what? They're probably going to be a little more flexible on their price point because you can say price and time are the only 2 factors that we have to really manipulate this. I mean, there's also market demand, but the bottom line is we're going to know in the first week or 2 if you are in the ballpark or not. So let's get to that. Jeff, will you pull
So
up? the
can
next- Go ahead.
is it okay if I share what's in my CMA? I don't feel like I really got to share.
Yeah, do it.
So, okay, so I put together a whole packet for them, and by the time we're done, they have no questions whatsoever. So the first thing I put is the information from the county, because a lot of times the square footage is off, something's off in it, and I found that many times. And so I go over that, so they get to see that. And a lot of times they'll have an appraisal that shows the footage is different. That makes a big difference in the price. The next thing is their lot plat map, and the next is the aerial. Then it goes into what is the CMA. Just like you were talking about the active, the pendings, and the solds, I've got them all in there with pictures of what for all of them, for the pendings, the active, and the solds. And then I give a range as well. And then I give a recommended list price with that range. And then I have a graph that talks about time. And I talk to them right then about how soon we'll know if it hasn't sold by this time, we've got to do a reduction. And then I have a net proceeds that shows them what they'll walk away with. And so
I
really
love
pretty.
it. So that's actually part of your packet.
That's my whole thing. And it's like I leave it with them. And I don't know.
Well, let's get to that point, because that's a big one for me. So we've talked about like setting the appointment, getting ready for the appointment. Obviously, 4 different people, 4 different ways of doing this, which I love. So good thing we don't have 10 panelists. But I tend toward Joe, where I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm going to, at most I'll send a follow-up email, and then maybe call back. And then if you're not interested, I'm out. One of the things that's, I think, hard for a lot of agents to get over is not getting the listing. And it's like, move on, you guys. It's kind of like, I always told my girlfriends in high school, don't chase after the guy that broke up with you. Just move on. He doesn't want to be with you. They don't want to list with you. Go on.
And I think that what's worked for me, and it's that getting them, like, kind of not even giving them an option to go to somebody else, if that makes sense. Like, I go in without all the documentation and things, and I exude competence and knowledge about their property, but then I'm going to send you the documentation digitally. As soon as I get home, we're going to test to make sure that you know how to use that information. So I know right away, like, if some people can't sign either age or technologically disadvantaged, then I know if I'm going to have to, how much more time and effort I'm going to have to put into that property as well, like going to get actual ink signatures and things like that. If I try to do that in advance, we'll send if I can get their legal name and email, and send, I'm going to send you like the signatures for an agency, and then an advisory that I'd like them to read. This is new. I just added this to my listing stuff because there's a new listing advisor, or a new seller and buyer advisories with OR that are amazing. And I wanted to add one more thing before we move on. I work with a lot of new agents and do a lot of mentoring. And so I know some of those people may be listening today, but if you don't feel competent in going to that appointment, I always tell them when they're pre-listing, when they're having that conversation with the person and then doing their pre-listing stuff, is to tag us in. You have a partner that's a specialist in whatever area that their home is maybe unique in, or whether it's, so that kind of adding that extra level of confidence for you.
Or even just saying, like, I'm going to be bringing a team member. And the best part is, not only do you get me, you get a team. And you don't have to be on a team, you guys. We're all part of the same brokerage. If you're with XP, then or whatever brokerage, if you're watching from another brokerage, as long as you're in the same brokerage, you can really legitimately say, we're on the same team. This is a team member. This is a colleague. This is a partner agent. You don't have to say, I'm new and this is my mentor. I'm terrified. I don't know what I'm doing. Don't say that. You'll figure it out.
I'm going to bring along a market specialist for your neighborhood or whatever it might be. And I tell them not to say that, not I'm new or anything like that, but is there, I just let them know in advance if there's somebody extra coming in.
Yeah, remember, if you're new, they don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it. Okay, Jeff, pull up the next one, because this is, I think we're really going to cover a lot of ground here. So the appointment, here are some things I want us to think about. what to take with you, presentation or not, taking a tour, the seller's goals and timeline, using a seller net sheet, review property details. Gosh, we've already talked about all of this, you guys, but not in detail. Explain the transaction processes and timelines, discuss your marketing strategy, set expectations for things like communication, signature preferences, open houses, showings, etc., staging, housing preparations, repairs, and inspections. So let the games begin, because I can guarantee you we don't all agree on these steps and these different things. I'm a simple girl. I am all about I do take paperwork, by the way, because I want your signature.
Yeah.
I'm not going to wait to leave. I'm going to get your signature. If you're going to list with me, I'm going to get your signature on at least one document. And I'm going to leave the SPUDs, the seller property disclosure statement, papers with you if you have a scanner, especially. And I'm going to leave it even if you don't, so that you can look at it. To me, those are some hooks that I really like to use. It's real minimal. I have one folder that I always have a listing agreement document folder in my car at all times, or multiples of them, because you never know.
How do you get around not having a price on it?
What?
How do you get around not having a price on your listing?
Oh, you can fill that in. You can fill that in later.
Because I use them as take notes, but I don't ever have them sign it.
Oh, I have them sign it, and then I put in price, and then I will scan it, put in the price, and have them initial it. That's easy. Or a lot of times I'll just determine price with them right there.
Yeah.
And that's why I always use a seller net sheet. That's why I always try to have at least the comp, stats page with me so that I can show them. But I mean, that's worst case scenario. But also I've taken listings sitting in my car, parked on a street, just doing paperwork in my car before someone's come out and said, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I can move. Just a realtor, just doing some paperwork." "You're a realtor? Wow, we were thinking about selling your house." Literally, this happened to me. I went in, I was like, "Well, hi." We started talking. I was like, "I have time. You want to give me a tour?" I took their listing and I had a packet in my, and it happened to be an older couple that didn't want to do electronic, just kill me now. That was the worst. But anyway, so I did as much of the paperwork as I could right there, because I didn't want to have to go back a million times. So let's talk. Number one, Nancy, it sounds like you have a presentation. I don't have a presentation. I only use paperwork and myself. What do you told us kind of
in the presentation, I also have stats and all of that too, the summary sheets and the whole thing. Yeah.
And are you doing that through MLS, RPR? How are you? Is it multiple things?
Cloud CMA. Well, I run the CMA in MLS, and then I input the listing numbers into Cloud CMA, and then I've chose the things that I want to put in it, and then I just print it out of there, and then so
I will say, if you're an agent that hasn't taken the time, and I know it's a pain in the neck, but to go into your MLS and to set up your CMAs with what you want to see on them for new agent or for new clients, so that you can just pull that up and have it done instead of having to do it every time. Set up those templates or those rows, the columns, you can name them. To me, it just saves time, and it's a pain to do it up front, but once you're organized, it's really easy. Jeannie, what do you use?
I use RPR, which is completely.
What is RPR?
It's Realtors Property Resource. It's a product that's available to all NAR participants. And essentially, it gives you what they call is RVM, the Zillow estimate of the property, and then you tweak it based on adding comps to that report, etc. You can narrow it down to a specific neighborhood or a subdivision, or you can spread it out school district. It's all encompassing. It has the history of the property, including previous photos from other listings the house is sold for. It has all the listing photos for every comp that you put in there. It automatically generates market reports and other things. And it's all you do the CMA, but then it does all the work for you on
And
the
then you
rest of
can
it.
just hit send and either send it to
Yes,
yourself
create a report. There's
or
multiple things.
to your client.
Yep. And then it also creates net sheets and everything. It literally is one thing that does the work of all of the other things.
Jeannie, it's also nationwide, right? So if
Nationwide.
you wanted to be extra helpful and they're like, we're moving to Cincinnati, ha ha ha, we don't know anything about Cincinnati. You can be like, you know what's interesting? Do you know what part of town? I can pull some information for you. And then you can send them some stats because it's nationwide. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. And the only issue it has is if it's linked to the MLSs that you're in. So sometimes because here in Oregon, we have the 8 different MLSs, sometimes it will pull up accurate information. So I cross check it with the local MLS as well to see if there's something that got missed, and you could add those properties to your CMA in that report. And it brings
so
that
Jeannie,
up.
you do that before you go to the appointment, right?
I do it before I go to the appointment. Initially, I don't bring that report with me and I don't send that to them. I wait until I have, it gives me an idea of what the comps look like. And if I walk into a house, I'm like, okay, most of the houses in your neighborhood have been updated. This one hasn't. I know that because I've seen the pictures of them already, right? Or I know it gives me a really comprehensive idea of everything that I need to know without looking for multiple places. It tells me what the legal owner is, it tells me what the taxes are, it tells literally everything there is to know about that property. But I don't take it with me, and I go back after I see the property, and then I might have to be like, okay, now this one doesn't match. And I try to narrow it down to as few properties as possible to get a really accurate number. And in some, like especially in cookie cutter neighborhoods. Now, if you're looking at a property that's maybe 10 acres and it's outside of town, and you're going to have to look way far out for comps, you'll know right away that as well, because you're not going to find them by the searching for in that product where those are. And so it's just extremely comprehensive in one product. That's why I use it.
That's great. Joe, you were like what do you do in the meeting with people in terms of anything?
Again, there's a appraiser buddy of, he was a appraiser, he's a realtor buddy of Scott and I, Scott Gephardt and I, and he would always say, if you can't dazzle him with brilliance, baffle him with bullshit. So to me, it's
a fine line between the two.
I think we all got to level up both.
So sometimes if I'm going to pull up the RPR or something like that, I only do that for somebody that needs to be baffled with bullshit. So, if you're going to appreciate intelligent conversation about what I think you got going on in your neighborhood and stuff like that, then that's one thing. If I think that you're going to require something that's this thick that a computer spits out in seconds that you're never going to read through and looks ridiculous, then I'm going to go ahead and print that thing up and fire it over to you. I'm not going to look through it.
I don't print it. I don't ever print it. I just use it for my own information. Yeah.
I remember printing one and handing it to a lady one time. I just thought, what did that
83 pages.
Like $17 in ink,
Yeah, I don't. And I like to explain to people, like, I like to be green. I can send this to you electronic.
Yeah. It's 83 pages. It automatically creates 83 pages.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't bring anything except either, a sheet of paper or the Remarkable, and just, if they're really smart looking, I walk around with my little Remarkable tablet, because that way they think I'm smart. But, it's literally, that's just back to baffling them, right? So, I really just don't go in with anything. I seriously don't. I might Zillow their house on the way to it sometimes, but like the one today, I'm going to get there early because I'm not familiar with the neighborhood. So I want to be intelligent, but most of this stuff, we've been doing it long enough. If you're a good producer, you kind of know what the hell's going on. One of the things I really appreciate the way Nancy does stuff. It's not the way I do it, but I have an appreciation for the detail and the prep and how good somebody can feel about that relationship that she builds and everything. And so for some people, that's going to be great. And I think one of the most important things for anybody that's new is to see that there's multiple ways to do this. Mm-hmm. I'm really selfish with my time because I need to go, quickly. I need to get on to the next thing, whatever I'm doing. I don't want to follow up and everything else like that. So that's just the way I run my business. I did it the whole time. But when you're new, if you feel like you're going to feel better having more of a relationship with somebody and sitting down and spending that amount of time, then by all means. I mean, that's maybe you'll seal the deal that way. I don't need that. I don't think anybody, with me personally, I don't need another friend, and I don't think they do either. So, they just want somebody that's gonna, that feels confident about what's going on with their transaction and can just jump in and say, this is the way it is. Have a nice day.
So let's talk
Yeah.
about that for a minute, because I think that whether it's that you're building rapport to establish trust and expertise, or you're building rapport because you want it to be a continuing relationship, or you already have a relationship, regardless, I think that the number one tool that you can walk into a listing appointment with is the ability to read your audience and adjust accordingly. If I'm spewing compliments, and which I try to avoid, I try to stay pretty neutral. But like, I've read some of the books that we've all read in real estate where it's like, don't let them give you a tour. Tell them, have your clipboard and tell them that you're going to walk around and blah, blah. Bull honky. That's their house.
Yeah.
They should give me the tour, and I'm just going to ask some questions. I'm going to whatever. I'm not going to be like, wow, it looks like, you've got some mold growing or whatever. I mean, I might ask some questions, but again, you need to be really careful. You don't want to offend. You don't want to have to, require disclosures. I mean, you need to ask some questions that are important. Like, looks like you made a repair right there. What was that about? Whatever, hey, there's a discrepancy. I noticed when I was looking at the information, there's a discrepancy in there, in your square footage. And they'll say, oh yeah, we tore down a storage room that was attached to the house, or we added
The
a
bigger one is
greenhouse.
they added something without a permit.
Well, that's the thing. So if they add, then you say, oh, great. Do you guys have permits for that or whatever? I like to be careful with square footage because, you can report it differently. And sometimes if somebody's done an addition, whether it was properly permitted or not, that's a whole nother conversation to have. But the square footage, if I change and report the square footage differently in the MLS, it can trigger a tax assessment. And now I've made people really mad.
Oh.
And that's not my job, because I have options on how I want to do it. If they say it's 3,000 square feet, then I'm going to put it down as 3,000 square feet reported. Or if the tax records say 3,000 and they tell me 3,200, I'm probably going to leave it at 3,000. And I'm going to explain to them, hey, we're going to leave the county has you guys down as 3,000, but I can put a note that, you guys did an addition or whatever, not reflected in square footage or something. But we can work it a bunch of different ways. By the way, if you ever have a question about something like this or a million other things that come up in a transaction, call your broker. Period. I am a stickler about this. I know Jeannie is. I know most of us are. And I know most of us at least were when we first started, because if you don't know something, you better find out from your broker, because technically you represent your broker legally. You are their representative. So you need to find out how they want you to write that special addendum, or how to handle stuff like reporting discrepancies in square footage and that kind of stuff. It's not to be messed around. It's your legal butt on the line. So I just say, when in doubt, call your broker. And we have the most reachable, accessible, communicative brokers I've ever experienced at EXP. I've just, to a person in now 3 different states, super impressed. Okay, guys. So,
I was going to add, I don't have like a formal listing presentation because
Right.
of that, specifically of that, like read the room kind of situation, and understanding people's different levels of buying and selling and competency and all of that stuff. The only thing I usually take with me is a data sheet so that I can when I don't have to go back a second time to see if they have a garbage disposal or see like all of like those kind of details. And I just keep track of those little things along with notes. Like maybe they have a plug-in for a generator. You're not going to, all those notes are on that. And then mostly just talk as much as I can about, I'm there for about an hour. That's usually, and I give basically the whole spiel of everything that you have on that list is in that time frame. But that the pre-listing information is what I go in with competence, so I could have those conversations to ask those questions and to know in advance, so I don't have to contact them as I'm filling out the paperwork later on multiple times going, oh wait, did I have this or did they not have this? And just have it time saver.
Yep. Okay. Anything else that you guys want to, I think there's obviously important to build rapport, ask some questions, take notes on data.
I'll have a conversation sometimes with them about like whether or not they want to have now in this market, having a pre-listing inspection possibly in past ones. So I would be like, yeah, but there's no reason for that. It's going to sell regardless of condition. But now with buyers being more discerning, we might want to know what they're going to find in advance and get some of those things done. Because if you can get them done before we list, it's going to cost you less money.
So, right. So we're going to talk about documents and legal requirements in a minute. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about staging. Some people have designers walk through so that they can kind of get out of the fray of having to tell people like, I've had to tell people to take religious relics off of the walls. And I'm talking extreme, or personal pictures, like pictures of kids to declutter, all of the language, all of the things we've all had to ask for a lot of those things. And sometimes it goes over well, sometimes it doesn't. I tend to take the tough love mom approach. Like, listen, remember when we talked about our goal together was to get you top dollar so that you have the best return on investment of your property in the time frame that you want. So if you want those things to happen, I need your help by look. And I always frame it this way. People know you're moving. That's why you're selling your house. Don't be afraid of a few stacked boxes in your garage. So start packing now, and here's what I recommend.
That's what I do.
And then I give them like the list. Now, there's again, no wrong way, no right way. I think it depends on your market. I think it depends on price point. I don't use stagers. I haven't. I'm pretty good at kind of helping people to stage their own house a little bit. I don't have people do a lot of stuff. Oh, no. Yes, Jeff is chef. Yes. But I explain it. It is sometimes it's time for tough love. And I just tell people, you know what? One of the reasons that I'm so successful at what I do is because I'm a straight talker. And I'm going to tell you some things that you may not want to hear. But what I do know is that you want to sell your house, and that's what I'm really good at. Yeah. So let's partner to do this in a way that makes that work. And that's Joe said. But you know what?
Had one that had the whole house was painted yellow, including the ceilings. And when they bought the house, it was on the market for a long time, and they didn't do any. It was like that when they bought it. And I'm like, do you understand why the house was on the market? And to have that conversation about like the things that would in this market increase their ability to sell for more, and those kinds of things. Nobody wants to walk into a house. Like walk into your house, be like, what would you immediately want to change when you saw it? Like what we're going to have to go for that same kind of feeling. We don't want somebody walking in and immediately going, oh God, I have, $10,000 worth of painting or backbreaking work to do. Like we want to take that away from them.
And that's where not being afraid to have a conversation about like, listen, it may cost $8,000 to have your house painted, and it's not going to be the easiest thing. But again, remember, you can start packing now, and that will make it a lot easier. We can have that $8,000 paid at close, so you don't have to pay it out of pocket right now? Because a lot of people really have concern about those circumstances, right?
Well, and then also the buyer always increases the amount of what it actually costs. So if you in your mind think this is what it's going to cost, the buyer's going to double it. And so you can either pay for it by reducing your price and double what the value is, or we can just get it done right now, you know.
Or you can give a credit, and then having the tough conversations are people that say like, we know we need new carpet. And you're thinking, yeah, don't give a carpet credit. It's not a worthy credit to give, but Jiminy Christmas, the yellow paint has got to go. I mean, those are the things that are super uncomfortable. And if you're a newbie and you're first having these conversations, you may lose some listings. But my most powerful tool, like my magic wand, is options. It's a stick that says options. If you give options that you as the agent can live with to your client, and they choose from those options, you've empowered them and you can live with it, right? So I would say, look, we can do a credit at close for paint. We can do a credit, or we can paint it now and have it pay at close. Or you can do nothing and we may suffer the burden of a lesser price. So there are some choices, And now they get to choose. They feel like they have power because they get to choose. So don't ever forget, I believe it's everybody's number. And I know for a fact that Jeannie uses this a lot. But there's always the option 1 means this, option 2 means this. So yeah. You just got to work.
And then I also do what you do when it comes to like, this process is going to be really fast. By the time we get you up and running, it's going to only be 30 days, sometimes less, before we're going to close. Start packing now. Get rid of all of your personal items and allow them to focus on the things that are important, like the countertops and the other things that, clear it out. And because once you get under contract, you're going to find that you don't have any time to pack anyways, or edit, or get rid of the things that you weren't going to take with you to begin with. Take that time now and get that done in the next week, because we'll be here for photos on Thursday.
Yep. Jeff, let's pull up the documents and legalities, because I think this is important, because this is sometimes, and I'll be honest, you guys, this is why I use the contract and all the documents as my presentation. Because I never bring that out, right? Until we start talking about listing and commission, price point, those kinds of things, because then I can sit down and I say, you know what, why don't we do this? I'm going to want you to understand the contract anyway. And this will help me to explain the timeline of a transaction and what goes on. So then I literally just start. And what I love about this is that by the time I get to the end of going through all of that stuff, you guys, they don't want to work with anybody else. I've explained it all. They know what they're going to get. They've already gone through the paperwork and they think, now I've got to go through this with someone else. And I straight up tell people, most agents will not go through these documents, but this is the biggest legal, decision and commitment that you're going to make for most of us, is buying and selling houses. So it's important for you to do that. And I like to do it in this context, because then I can cover the timeline. I can cover expectations of like price decreases and everything. And then I also know that I have my documents done, or at least they're going to be ready to sign them. Like I'll fill them in. And if they don't want to sign them, I'll say, listen, you don't have to sign them. Let's fill it in. We can leave the price blank. You guys think about it. And then when I get back to the office, you guys will have this for a reference. I can send this to you electronically. You guys can let me know where where you've decided to fall on pricing. And then you can just sign it electronically. And then you can talk them through the electronic thing, right? Because that's part of what you've got to talk to them about. So what do you guys, when you deal with this kind of stuff, like let's say, Joe, you're kind of the lowest maintenance in terms of not going in with paperwork or pulling a bunch of stuff. So what happens if you're there and they're like, yeah, we're ready, Joe, let's do it. Do you talk to them at that point about like lock boxes, signs? Do you get the information like they have a gas water heater or whatever? Like, how do you handle it in the moment then?
Well, I mean, gas, water, heater. So, I mean, I take notes when I'm in there. I mean, so, so I'll go through, because I show up with no preconceived notion, but I'm going to leave, an expert on their home and, qualified to send them back, the three different, price points that I, discussed. And my first price reductions kind of talked about when I tell them how I'm going to arrive at the value. When I say automated, math, and then market, where we're going to kind of cheat it up a little bit. And I count everything by weekends. I said, so for me, it's not how many days it's been on the market, it's how many weekends I've been on the market. I say I always like to go live on a Friday. And in fact, when agents go live in the early part of the week, I love it if I'm representing a buyer because I can get their house under contract before they ever get weekend exposure. I said that done twice in multiple offer situations. I told both clients, I said, if this went to the weekend, you couldn't own this home. So we won both multiple offers, but I said, we're only going to win because this hit the market on a Tuesday. If this hit on a Friday, you can't have this house. So, but I explained to my seller why I'm going to go live on a Friday. I said, in 2 weekends, the public's going to tell us what they think of our pricing. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to press it up for those first 2 weekends. Is that okay? Nobody ever says, no, I don't want you to try to press it up for those first 2 weekends.
I do the same thing. I love it.
Yeah. So now my first price reduction is already built in because it's after those first 2 weekends. But it's like, what do you think we should do? Well, we should probably start taking math into consideration at this point. So,
yeah, see, he's already prefaced all of this, you guys.
Yeah. I always tell them we want the most amount of eyes in the least amount of time. So we list on a Friday, we hold an open house, get the numbers. If we have a bunch of people come through and we have no offer, we're overpriced. If we have nobody come through, let's wait till next weekend and see how we get kind of information we get throughout the week and then the following weekend. And we know right then, like, whether or not we are kind of in that ballpark by inching it up just a little bit, especially on a unique property or in a situation where you don't have great comps.
See, real quick, just, because I don't go in with anything doesn't mean I don't show up with anything, right?
I agree.
You're still at the very beginning. I said the most important thing is to gain their confidence. Mm-hmm. And so it's the way I talk about what's going to happen. When you take somebody and you start saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to arrive at value 3 different ways. This is how they're going to be. I like to press it up a little bit if that's okay with you. I like to do things through weekends, and we're going to count those first 2 weekends, and then we're going to look and see what the public thinks of our property. Is that okay with you? All of those things, by me taking charge and explaining to them the way this thing is going to go, now all of a sudden they know that I have confidence in what I'm saying. And they always say, that first you have to have confidence in yourself, and then they can have confidence in you. So I walk in already knowing exactly the way this thing is going to play out. And because of the fact I'm confident in the things I'm going to say, even though quite honestly, there's no numbers in it, there's no substance in it. I could walk into the neighbor's house and say this exact same thing, right now, because I'm going to build the actual math and everything else like that later on. But because I explain how the process is going to work, they're just sitting there going, okay, I'm in. That's good.
I love this.
Yeah, same.
So let me, I think the 3 of you are absolutely perfect for this panel for so very many reasons. But one of the things is just the fact that the process, the paperwork, human behavior so well, all 3 of you. And yet you take different positions. Let me ask you, because the biggest thing right now, the biggest scary right now is the change in commission and how we're handling that now. So when we're talking about, and we had Christine Kites did an absolutely fantastic session a few weeks ago about this, but I know this is a change for all of us in taking listings. So can you guys, in a nutshell, give me, I love, like Joe is so intentional about his language. He takes command, but you hear he uses tie downs that give control and empower the client. It's really impactful. It's so awesome. So what are you guys saying? Help us with the verbiage. When you're talking about commission now, if your client knows or doesn't know, whatever, that there are some changes, tell us how you guys are handling that right now. I think the verbiage is really important for people to hear. Nancy, let's start with you because you've been doing this. You've been in real estate for how long?
34 years, but keep in mind that it's harder for somebody that's been in it so long. And I never had a buyer's rep agreement signed before. So
Right.
it's like been a little harder for me. But I just explained to them that, traditionally it was I would take the listing and a portion of that listing was shared with the buyer's agent. And so I explained to them, and then it was put in multiple listing. Now, when we're working with a buyer, the rules are that we have to have a buyer's rep agreement signed with them, contract with them, just like a listing agreement, but it's only representing them as the buyer. And I tell them that they don't have to pay the buyer's agent, but then I tell them how important the buyer's agent is and so I think it's just in the way that we present it. So far, everybody has always said, oh no, I want to pay the buyer's agent because I've sold how important it is.
Well, they also have to buy another house usually, so they have that, they
Yeah.
recognize the importance of it.
That's a really good
and they do
point.
recognize the importance of it. They really do. And I think and then I also present it too, that if they're not going to pay the buyer's agent, then they're going to be looking at a reduced offer coming to them. And it's probably going to be more than what the commission would have been.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
So I have a different approach on it.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah.
So when I work with the listings, I let them know that we're not going to tell any buyer's agent whether or not we're paying a buyer's agent commission. We're just going to tell them to bring us an offer. Just, and because if I say in advance that my seller is willing to pay a 3% or 2.5% interest or commission, then they're going to likely covet that. Now, maybe they've had agreement to pay 1% or just 2%. Then now my seller's paying more because I represented that they would pay more.
Yeah.
So, and then it's going to depend on the offer too. Like if you send us an offer, if it's a low ball offer, we're not going to do that. We want to keep all of our options open and play every single offer for its value.
So do you have a conversation though with your seller in advance of that to explain what Nancy said is that, listen, you don't have to, but you can. Here's why you may want to. I'm not going to commit you to
educating, definitely educating.
And then you just tell them, so listen, we will assess.
Right.
That your
first we have to re-educate all of our buyers and sellers. We have to re-educate them because they're getting information from the news sources and they're getting information from their friends, and they may have information from other realtors that don't necessarily understand what the changes are and how they impact everybody. So I try to make sure that they're fully educated on what has happened and how that impacts them. And then rather than saying like, we are definitely paying a buyer's agent. No, what we're going to do is we're going to rely on the buyer to tell us what they need and then determine if that fits in with where you're at.
This is where I love that. I mean, number one, communication is essential. You need to prepare them for this. Two, you give them options because you're saying, listen, we're going to consider it on a case-by-case basis with offers, but it also brings in what Joe was saying about math. Just do the math. If you have run a seller net sheet with them, and let's say, Joe's like, hey, I'd like to nudge it up a little bit to start because we can always move down. You can't move back up, right? So let's start up and see what happens. Let's not leave money on the table. So then they have in their head, you can recall that. You can say, listen, this would be $5,000 less than that number. Now they're actually dealing with something of substance, right? That they can relate to. And they're like, oh, well, I mean, we got a full price offer. Yeah, we're going to have to come down 5,000, but it's still the first week. And Joe said we were nudging up. I mean, all these things work together. Joe, how are you having this conversation?
Recorded.
Not.
Huh?
How are you going to have this conversation this afternoon?
Dude, I'm just like, what changed?
Uh-huh.
I mean, I get texts on all of my listings from the agents saying, are they offering a BAC? I was texting on most of them saying, is there a preset BAC? I can't, I think that's happening on almost every serious showing. The conversation is already asking about the preset BAC. So broker agent commission for, so, I mean, and I'm getting people that sits there like good agents. I only have to ask them one time. He says, yeah, it's 2.5 and it will be on every transaction. Thanks. Likewise. Have a nice day. So for me, part of the education is telling somebody, hey, this is the way things are today. There's a change that comes down when I'm writing this listing. It's only going to say X that I'm getting paid. It's only going to say X because that's what I'm getting paid. However, now where it used to be, it used to be 6% or 5% or whatever it was, and 3% went to the other side. Well, now that other side doesn't show up in this piece. However, the other side, when they write their offer, more than likely are going to be asking for a similar number to what they did before. Does that make sense? Okay. I mean, and I can sit there and throw in, in 1/10 of a second that it's negotiable. These are all negotiable. Okay, fine. So are closing costs.
Right.
So are close date. So is freaking everything else in a transaction. However, if I'm going to coach my person to be a seller that's going to have success, I'm not going to set them up in a situation saying, maybe you will pay it, maybe you won't, or maybe we'll adjust it along the way. And the other thing is, if I'm writing an offer, I want to know up front, if I sit there and say, hey, are they offering a preset BAC? And the other side says, yeah, 2.5. Perfect. If I come in $25,000 low on the offer, it didn't have shit to do with my money. You said 2.5% BAC. I have that thing right here. So you want to negotiate over here, negotiate over here. I'm just saying that for me, I mean, yeah, it can get into it where you can move things around and stuff like that. Like I've actually changed some of my language as far as me being a little bit more negotiable. But quite honestly, most of it works out more favorably for me than it used to.
Same.
So, I mean, I didn't always take a 6% listing. Shame on me, but I did. So there'd be times I'd take a 5% or whatever. Now I'll sit there sometimes and I'll write down 3% on me, and I'll tell them that they're not going to end up paying more than 5.5% total, or they're not going to end up paying more than 5.25% total. And if the other guy ends up getting 2.5, then I'll drop down to 2.75. Yeah, you might want to just put that on my forehead. I'm just saying that, you've got to coach your people realistically on how it's going to go. It is all negotiable. And
there's also the added aspect, though, of there's this air of a lot of buyers maybe not coming represented. And that's also now in our listing contract, or having the conversation like, well, if a buyer comes unrepresented, I'm taking 4 because I'm doing double the work. Mm-hmm. So I'm at 3. Then a buyer's agent comes and we'll figure out what maybe we pay them, maybe we don't. But if they don't come represented, now I'm at 4 because I'm doing double the work.
Okay.
But you're still getting less money.
So let's pause for a second because Jeff, I want you to, will you put up the next slide really quick?
Can I throw one more thing in there real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so all of a sudden I sit there and I say, okay, listen, we're going to negotiate. And then I tell my client, listen, this offer is 20 grand low. So let's do this. Let's counter back a little bit on price, and then let's counter back. And instead of paying 2.5 BAC, let's offer 1.75 BAC. Okay, cool. In a market where agents aren't doing tons of volume, and now I got this guy on the other side who receives this counter offer back, and he's like going, I'm sorry, but is he going to sit there and say, you know what, I think this is a great house and I really think you should go through with it? Or he'd say, you know what, I think this is a difficult seller and I already have questions on the roof, and if they're playing this hard right now, are we going to be able to get a repair that we're necessarily going to need? I'm just saying, if you start you don't kill the motivation of the guy that brought the buyer.
Right.
If you do, fine. Yeah. If you want to do it that way, fine. But I'm just saying, don't kill the motivation of the guy that's bringing the buyer.
Okay, so this
I
is
agree.
a couple weeks ago. We talked, Jeff and I did a session on negotiation and how absolutely essential it is that you become a good negotiator quickly. And I think that the more you know contracts, the better you are a negotiator because you know where you can give and take, right? It's a little bit, and I do love kind of the non-committal strategy of Jeannie because again, it gives options. There's power in that. And then you can negotiate. You can say, look, you came in low, but I think it was Joanne put in the notes. She's had several buyers willing to pay. You know what? My guess is they are using some strategies like, okay, I'm going to pay you the commission straight from me, the buyer, but let's ask for a concession from the seller. So I have to pay less out of pocket for closing. So they can afford, quote unquote, to pay her separately. So what I'm saying is there are lots of different ways to kind of come to the same conclusion. There are lots of different routes. If I'm going to Burger King, I can name 8 different ways to get there. And as a realtor, if you want to get to the close position on contracts that's going to make the seller happy and the buyer happy, everybody gets what they want and everybody gets paid, then you better know 8 ways to get there. Does that make sense?
And it goes for both sides because we're all, that's the best thing about this law is it's nationwide. That's the best thing about it. And that everybody's dealing with the same thing, but every single buyer and seller is in a very unique position when it comes to everything about them, everything. And I personally, as a buyer's agent, am going to ask for 3% every time. I'm not even going to ask if they're paying it. I'm just going to say, this is how much we're putting this on the contract, and we're going to ask for seller's concessions, and we're going to start the conversation. So with my buyers that are not up against other offers, right? Like that's one other caveat. Like if we're up against other offers, that negotiation is going to be completely different than if it is, so having that flexibility and understanding how the numbers and the math work and showing that both on the seller side and being able to tell my sellers, this is what I'm doing as a buyer's agent. So not all buyer's agents are doing this, but I'm telling you right now, if I had a buyer coming, this is what I would represent. And I'm going to ask for 3. But I just sold one recently that they didn't ask us if we were paying, and they came in at 2.5. Like, okay, well, 2.5. We might have paid you 3, but 2.5 is what it is. They dropped the price.
It's a big thing, but I think at the end of the day, what to know is there are lots of different ways to skin a cat.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I feel like if you're an agent and you want to become a better negotiator, you can take classes. That's great. But more importantly, sit down in your MLS and open up every single contractual page that's in there and read it and figure out what it means. And if you don't understand it, send a message to your broker and say, hey, I was looking at we had a question about, do you pre-list in the MLS if the home's not ready? Well, not every state, first of all, does pre-list. Not every state allows that. But what are the options? How does that work? What does pre-list mean? What are the listing requirements? You have 72 hours in some states is 24 hours. It's a bunch of different things. Read all of your contracts in your MLS to understand. And if you don't understand what something is telling you, like sometimes on like a lease back, I'll have agents send me something on a lease back and I'm like, did you even read this? Do you understand what this says? Like if you have done that ahead of time and you've asked your broker questions or another agent that has more experience or different experience, you're going to be a better negotiator at the end of the day. And ultimately you're going to close more deals. Really quickly, because we have 2 minutes, man, we could talk about this a million times. Jeff, pull up the next slide super, super quick, just because I want to make sure that we're touching on just at least showing the things here. So post-appointment, you've got document management. You need to work out your marketing plan, what that's going to be. You need to schedule photography. You're going to need to TC or not to TC. Hold the pin in that one for a second.
Always
MLS
TC.
Data input and set open house dates if you're going to do that. Next slide, please. Negotiation and offers. Again, there are so many things we could talk about review and presenting offers, timing, all of that kind of stuff. We've touched on quite a bit of that. knowing all of the different components, counteroffers, contingencies, addenda, timelines for all of those, working with the buyer's agent, which we talked about a lot, negotiating options, finalizing contracts. Next slide, real quick, Jeff. Thank you. Transaction management, we talked a lot about this, marketing and price adjustments, inspections and repairs. Somebody asked a question, I think it was Christine, about do you encourage pre-inspections on listings? I do not, because I don't like to waste my clients' money. And no matter what you do in an inspection, the buyer's going to have an inspection anyway, and they're going to come up with different stuff. And then they're going to fix other stuff. And now they're really ticked off at you because you had them do an inspection to avoid all these repairs that they're going to have to do again anyway. I don't know about you guys. Does anybody feel any differently?
Only if I'm really concerned about the house. If I really feel like there's some problems, that's the only time.
Yeah,
Good
if there's red flags, I will point out, like if there's dry rot and things, I'm like, it's going to come up on inspection. They may or may not ask for it. Is it better for you to have your nephew go and fix it, not have to worry about like what things like that? Is it going to save them money to do it in advance and they're capable of doing it? Then we talk about those things, but I give them the option of it and tell them what the implications of that is. If you have a pre-list inspection, you could be fixing things that are not necessary. But if you also find things that are major components, then you might be saving yourself money.
Sure. And so we're not going to go into too much on appraisals, finance, inspections, and closings. Only because, like I said, we're going to have individual sessions on all of those and get real nitty.
You have to touch on them some because some houses may not finance for specific things. So
no, exactly. And so that's kind of why I brought that up. Some of the financing variances, closing date adjustments. I mean, bottom line is everything is malleable, until you get to that closing table. We all know. And even then we've had stuff kind of blow up, but just so that we're at least acknowledging that these are parts of it. The final walkthrough is a time. And I think that as a listing agent, you need to at least call your seller before that final walkthrough and say, hey, is everything in order? If they've already moved out, you can say, are you guys sure you didn't, ding, dent, take anything? Did you remember that these are the items that were supposed to stay? They were negotiated in. You've covered the fact that cabinetry is appurtenant. You can't just take shelves off of the walls if they're attached, which we've all had happen. And all those.
The big one I've run into is people don't, as soon as they're under contract, they don't maintain their property anymore. They let the grass grow and the debris build up and things like that. And it states in the contract, they're not supposed to do that.
Yeah. They turn off utilities. They let plants die, like a whole bunch of stuff. Absolutely. So I do think that those are things you need to preemptively discuss with your sellers and manage throughout the process. Somebody here is asking about, so Jeff, let's go out of the slides really quickly here. And we're going to wrap up with just a couple of quick little things. Do you use a TC? Do you use a sign company? These are all things that are really dependent on the agent and the stage. Like when I was first starting and I didn't have a lot of money and I was trying to make this all work, I put my own signs in. And then I realized that like high heels and mud in Oregon was not a good. So I didn't hire somebody then either, you guys. I just started wearing rubber boots.
Yeah.
Literally. Put them in the car.
So you got to do what you got to do. But then, having a sign company and they can store your signs, you just give them the date. It's a really beautiful thing if and when you can afford that. Using a TC, same thing. How many of you guys, show of hands, of the three of you, how many of you guys use a TC? Okay. So some of us do and some of us don't. It depends, in my opinion, on a lot of different factors. But I will say if you're a newer agent, please don't use a TC until you really understand everything and until you really understand what a TC does and what they can and can't do. We're going to have a whole session on TCs because this is such a big topic. I think TCs are amazing. I also think they can be an encumbrance. So it just depends on what kind of an agent you are. Sometimes it depends on load. If you're taking a lot of listings, some people really need a TC. Some people really don't want one. It doesn't matter how many listings they're taking. So it's all over the board. That's why we're going to have our own special topic on that. But as you guys can see, this is, transaction coordinator. Sorry, somebody who can handle scheduling and paperwork and documents and uploading and downloading and sending and emailing and all the things. So let me end it because we are 4 minutes over already. Agents are
We could
chatting
talk about this for days.
for days, literally for days. If you guys have questions, anybody out there, please feel free to reach out. Again, when in doubt, talk to your state broker. Thanks to Joe, Nancy, and Jeannie for sharing their expertise. I think you guys all got such a great perspective on the fact that there is no wrong or right way to take a listing, to engage with sellers. Make sure it's legal. I think that's the only thing I can say is make sure you're following legal protocol for your state. And according to whatever standards you're required to, whether you're a realtor through NAR or not, or whatever, it's all nuanced. You may be watching this and not with EXP. But thank you to our panel members for being here and sharing your expertise. If you have questions, let us know. Send me a message. You guys know how to find me. And be sure to tune in for next week because we're going to be talking about the other side, and that's working with buyers. Thanks so much, guys. Happy Wednesday, community. We love you, and we'll see you next week.